All right, so for today's deep dive, I want you to try a little thought experiment with me, just for a second.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine you have X-ray vision. You're up in a satellite looking down at the Earth. First, you look at the North Sea, right off the coast of Norway.
Got it.
Then you pan over to the deserts of Saudi Arabia. And then finally, you zoom way in on Central Asia, right onto Turkmenistan.
So if you're looking with that geological X-ray, you're seeing basically the exact same picture.
Right, triplets. Vast, deep, incredibly valuable oceans of oil and gas just sitting there. Geologically, these three places are siblings.
It's like they all won the same lottery, the ultimate winning ticket.
Exactly. But now, turn off the X-ray vision. Just look at the surface. Norway. They have a future fund worth over $1 trillion. It owns, what, something like 1.5% of every public company on Earth.
It's a safety net that will last for centuries.
Then you've got Saudi Arabia. They have a development fund. They're building these futuristic cities in the sand, trying to diversify their economy, using that oil money to buy stability.
And global influence, for sure.
And then, well, then there's the third sibling, Turkmenistan.
Where the money seems to just vanish. And, lately, it looks like the people are vanishing, too.
And that is the hook for today's deep dive. We're looking at a set of documents that present a really heavy but crucial thesis. Geology is just resources. Wealth. Wealth is institutions.
We have two incredible sources to unpack today. One is a very hard-nosed comparative economic analysis. It's just dated 17.01.2026. It really crunches the numbers on exactly how much money has gone missing.
And the second source is a political manifesto. It's titled Decolonization of Turkmenistan and Turkestan, Architecture of Transition, by an author named Sapar Iklim.
And our mission today is really to connect these two, because you can't understand the missing billions, and we are talking about a lot of billions, without understanding the political system, or the matrix, as this author calls it, that let all that wealth just disappear.
So let's start with the cash, because when I first read this economic analysis, I honestly had to double-check the math. It just felt, well, it felt impossible.
It is shocking, but the math is actually quite robust. To really get it, though, we need to clarify a term the source uses all the time. Resource rent.
Yeah, let's define that. We aren't talking about paying a landlord here, right?
No. In economics, rent is basically the super profit. It's the value of the oil or gas on the market minus the cost of, getting it out of the ground.
So it's the pure profit that geology just gives you.
Exactly. It's unearned income. So the huge question for any oil nation is, who gets to keep that rent?
Okay, so the analysis compares three different models for capturing this rent.
First up, you have the Norwegian model. Norway puts a very high tax on oil companies. We're talking around 78 to 80%. It's transparent. It's written in law.
Everyone plays by the same rules.
Right. And the money goes straight into that massive pension fund we mentioned earlier. High tax, high transparency. The public gets the bulk of the value.
Okay, then there's the Saudi model.
This is the authoritarian model. Saudi Arabia relies less on taxes and more on outright ownership. Their state oil company, Aramco, captures about 86% of that rent.
Wow.
And the state takes that massive pile of cash and just dumps it right into the national budget.
So high capture, high spending to keep the population stable, which of course brings us to Turkmenistan.
And this is where the alarm bells start ringing. The source indicates that while Turkmenistan looks like it has state-owned companies...
On paper. Yeah.
Right. But the effective rent take, the actual money that ends up in the public budget, is estimated by international analysts to be only 10 to 15%.
Wait, hang on. 10 to 15%. Versus 80 in Norway or 86 in Saudi Arabia.
Precisely.
So where on earth is the other, 70 or 80% going?
Well, the source suggests it just disappears into a web of opaque intermediaries, offshore accounts, and massive inefficiencies. It's siphoned off long before it ever has a chance to reach the treasury.
And the source actually calculates what this loss looks like over time.
They did. It's a 30-year retrospective from 1992 to 2024. They took the actual volume of gas and oil Turkmenistan produced. And remember, this is a huge amount, around 60 billion cubic meters of gas a year. So
the gas was physically pumped out of the ground. That's a fact.
It's a fact. And if Turkmenistan had just applied the Norwegian or the Saudi model, if they had captured the 80-ish% of the value, they should have been earning about $10 to $11 billion in pure profit every single year.
But they didn't.
No. Because of that low rent capture, the estimated revenue that actually reached the state was closer to 1.3 to 1.9 billion a year.
That is an annual gap of almost $9 billion
Exact-
every single
Every
year.
single year. And when you total that up over 3 decades, the source estimates the cumulative loss is somewhere between 240 and $280 billion.
$280 billion. I mean, it's hard to even conceptualize a number that big. That's not just corruption money.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nation-building money.
It is. That's enough to rebuild every road, school, and hospital in the country 3 times over. It's the difference between being a struggling nation and a wealthy modern state.
There's a really striking line in the source.
I know the one you mean. The future is rent that wasn't stolen.
Exactly. But, spreadsheets are one thing. The source uses this visual that really stuck with me to show what this theft looks like in the real world. They call it the airport test.
Oh, this is a brutal comparison. It really drives the point home.
So they compare Oslo's airport in Norway with Ashgabat's airport in Turkmenistan.
Right. So Oslo's airport, Gardermoen, it handles about 30 million passengers a year. It's busy, it's functional, it's a hub of commerce connecting Norway to the world.
Makes sense. And Ashgabat.
Ashgabat built this gleaming white marble airport for $2.3 billion.
Wow.
It's an architectural marvel shaped like a falcon, but it handles fewer than 1 million passengers a year.
The source calls it a golden cage.
And it is. But here's the darker implication of that. Empty airports usually mean empty cities.
Which connects directly to the demographic crisis mentioned in the report.
Yeah. Officially, the government says the population is over 6 million, but the source cites estimates based on, consumption data, migration patterns, that nearly half the population has left.
Half.
The real number might be closer to 3.5 or 4 million.
That is devastating.
Yeah.
Half the country is just gone.
People vote with their feet, and the text explicitly links this to the money. People disappear where the rent disappears. If that $280 billion had been circulating in the economy, creating jobs, funding businesses, people would have stayed. Without it, survival forces them out.
So, okay, we have a clear crime scene. The money is gone. The infrastructure is empty. The people are leaving. This leads us perfectly to that second document, the manifesto by Saparij Al-Klim, because if you just call this corruption, you're kind of missing the point, aren't you?
Exactly. Corruption is when a system is working, but someone's, stealing a little off the top. Iklim argues that in Turkmenistan, the theft isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. He introduces this concept of the post-colonial matrix.
Now, colonial is a loaded word. Usually we think of the British Empire or maybe the 19th century. Iklim is arguing this is a current operating system.
He is. He argues that for Central Asia, colonialism didn't end when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. The flag changed, the anthem changed, sure, but the matrix, the underlying structure of power, it remained exactly the same.
And he breaks this matrix down into 3 levels. I think we should walk through these because they explain why that $280 billion disappeared. So level 1 is institutional.
This is the hardware of the state. The source argues that the current institutions are still built on the old imperial model. Everything is centralized. Decisions flow from the top down.
There's no feedback from the bottom up.
Absolutely none. It's designed to extract resources for the center, not to serve the people on the periphery.
Which feeds right into level 2, the economic level.
And that's the rent model we were just discussing. In a normal economy, citizens are taxpayers. If you pay taxes, you demand representation. You're a shareholder in the nation.
But not here.
Here, the state owns all the resources. So citizens don't pay for the state pays the citizens with handouts, subsidies, or really just by allowing them to exist.
It completely flips the power dynamic. The
Yeah.
government doesn't need the people. The people need the government to survive.
Precisely. And that leads to the deepest and maybe the most difficult level to fix. Level 3, the mental level.
Yeah, this was the most psychological part of the reading. The source calls it suppressed subjectivity.
It's a complex term for a simple, tragic reality. Fear and passivity. The source traces this back 145 years. First, the Russian Empire destroys traditional self-governance. Then the Soviet Union spends 70 years systematically crushing private property and independent thought.
The source is actually pretty critical of the Soviet period. I think in the West, and even in the region, some people look back on that era with a bit of nostalgia, industrialization, literacy. But Iklim calls it a colony in disguise.
It's a very specific argument he's making. He argues that while the Soviets built schools, they practiced classic colonial management. You specialize the region to provide raw materials, cotton, gas. You destroy the local elites who might lead an independence movement. And most importantly, you make sure all the real decisions are made in Moscow.
And his argument is that the current regime just stepped into Moscow's shoes.
He says it's actually worse. He calls the current phase a settlement colony. The post-Soviet regime didn't just inherit the system, they perfected the isolation. They turned the country into a closed loop where the state owns everything, the land, the gas, and in their minds, the people.
Okay, so if you accept this diagnosis, that if the country is trapped in this matrix, how do you get out? Because usually manifestos are just angry, they shout, down to the dictator, and then, that's it. This document feels different.
It really does. It reads like a blueprint. That's why the whole section is titled The Architecture of Transition. The author, Separ Eklem, treats the nation like an engineering project. You don't just blow up the old building, you need scaffolding to build the new one, or the roof falls on your head.
He proposes 7 phases of decolonization. We can't go through them all in detail, but I want to highlight the ones that seem most critical. He starts with opening memory.
And that's the foundation. He calls for a Truth and Memory Commission. It sounds abstract, but it's really practical. You have to open the KGB archives. You have to admit who was deported, who was repressed. You can't heal a national trauma if you're still keeping it a state secret.
Then comes lustration. Now, that's a word that can scare people. In post-conflict zones, that often turns into a witch hunt.
He's very careful here. He specifically distinguishes his plan from a purge. He calls it a sanitary filter. You have to review judges, prosecutors, officials. If they committed crimes, they go. But you can't fire everyone, or the state collapses and the lights go out.
It's about ensuring the people running the new machine aren't the same ones who broke the old one.
Exactly.
The phase that felt most connected to our missing $280 billion was economic decolonization.
Land reform and private property. This is the absolute antidote to the rent model. If a farmer actually owns his land, really owns it, with a deed he can take to a bank, he isn't a serf to the state anymore. He has economic freedom.
And once you have economic freedom, you inevitably start demanding political freedom.
You do. But part of the plan that really surprised me was the focus on language. The source explicitly says the opposition needs to change its vocabulary.
Yes. This is a fascinating psychological insight. He says, stop using words like struggle or overthrow. Those are words of conflict and war.
So instead of struggle, he suggests maturation. Or instead of overthrow, it's restoration of subjectivity.
Think about how that reframes the whole situation. It's not a war against an enemy. It's a nation growing up. It's taking responsibility. Maturation implies the current state is just childish.
Yeah.
Undisciplined.
It creates a narrative of inevitability rather than violence.
It's distinctively nonviolent. It's saying, we don't need to burn the house down. We just need to remodel it so we can actually live in it.
Exact.
And there's always but ideas are cheap. Execution is hard. The source has a whole section on the role of the architect.
This is the real call to action. Eklem argues that you cannot wait for the regime to fall to start planning. That just creates a vacuum, and history teaches us that chaos fills vacuums.
He talks about having ready-made tools.
Right. Draft the laws now. Design the land reform now. Train the specialists now. He argues that on day one of a transition, you need to have the folder ready on the desk.
And this is where he brings in the diaspora. He reframes them really nicely, not as refugees or runaways, but as an external brain.
I loved that phrasing. Instead of seeing people who left as victims or traitors, you view them as a laboratory. They're out in the world, learning how banking works in London, how independent courts work in New York, how tech works in Tokyo. They're acquiring the skills the country lacks.
So when the window of opportunity opens, they can just plug back in.
Right. It turns the brain drain into a brain trust. It's an optimistic view, for sure, but it gives agency to people who probably feel very helpless right now.
He also zooms out, doesn't he? He mentions Turkestan, not just Turkmenistan.
Yeah, he argues this is a regional problem. All of Central Asia is dealing with this Soviet hangover to some degree. Turkmenistan is just the most extreme case, the purest form of the matrix, if you will.
But the solution, this architecture of transition, could apply to the whole region.
That's his argument.
And he has a message for the international community. But he's not asking for sanctions or troops or awareness campaigns.
No, he's asking for architectural support. He wants the world to recognize this as a post-colonial problem, not just a dictator problem. He's asking for help with archives, education standards, legal frameworks. He's saying, don't just pity us, help us build the structure that replaces the regime.
So let's step back and look at the whole picture. We've gone from a staggering loss of $280 billion money that could have turned the steppes into a new Norway, to this deep diagnosis of a 135-year-old colonial mindset.
It's a journey from theft to dignity, really.
What's the one thing that connects these two for you? The money and the manifesto.
For me, it's the definition of the future. The source says, the future is rent that wasn't stolen. But I think when you read Iklim's manifesto, you realize the rent isn't just cash.
What do you mean?
The rent is the potential of the people. The stolen rent is the education they didn't get because the schools were bad. It's the businesses they didn't start because they couldn't own property. It's the years they spent in fear instead of innovation.
That's a really powerful way to put it.
Recovering the money is critical. You need capital to build things. But recovering the mind, that subjectivity, that's how you make sure the money doesn't just get stolen again by the next guy who sits in the big chair.
It really makes you look at those empty marble airports differently. They aren't just bad investments or vanity projects anymore.
No, they're monuments. They are monuments to a system that loves the idea of a state, the flags, the buildings, the parades, but doesn't actually care much for the people living in it.
And that leads to the source's final provocative thought. It points at this huge paradox. The regime's slogan is always, everything for the people, and yet physically, the people are disappearing.
A paradox that cannot last.
It really can't.
The source argues the choice is binary. It's 0 or 1. Either you continue as a periphery of empire, a resource colony that slowly fades away as the oil runs out, or you become the architects of your own future.
And that idea, being an architect of your own future, that resonates whether you're in Ashgabat or anywhere else, really. It challenges you to look at the systems you live in and ask, are we just living in the building, or are we helping to design it?
Because if you don't design your own future, someone else will design it for you. And trust me, they won't design it for your benefit.
A sobering but empowering thought to end on. We'll leave you to mull over that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden billions and the architecture of transition.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.